Welcome back to this afternoon's session. We're delighted to be able to, again, change the focus a little bit and look in this third session for an artist's perspective. I guess this morning we saw some things around policy. We then had some examples of projects that are doing really interesting work with artists. We just thought it would be really interesting to get the perspective now of the artist working in these types of projects. And very early in the programming of this, we thought, gosh, wouldn't it be great to get a poet or somebody working in this and speaking to us. So it was wonderful when Emma's name was proposed, and when we looked at your work, we thought, what a wonderful way to kickstart the afternoon. So we have talks from Emma Must, Ingrid Hess, Eileen Hutton, and then we have our panel session, which isn't on this panel, but isn't on this program, but we will have a little discussion amongst the three of us about that. So we're rattling on well through the day. Sorry, I don't know how that. Of course. I'm sorry. Absolutely not. So without further ado, can I ask you to give a warm welcome to Emma Must? Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't think I've ever had such a lovely welcome. Thank you very much. And what a gorgeous room. I do think that glass and palm fronds and light are three of my actual favourite things. And I had such a big breakfast, I didn't have lunch, but the lunch looked pretty good as well. So it's lovely to be here. I am going to be reading a few poems from my collection, The Ballad of Yellow Wednesday. So, at dawn on Wednesday, the 9th of December 1992, after years of public inquiries and legal action and campaigning, the workmen and bulldozers of the British Department of Transport moved onto Twyford Down, near Winchester in the south of England, which was a mile-long hill of chalk in an area of outstanding natural beauty, very close to where I grew up. They were going to begin the final phase of the construction work, or the main phase of the construction work, on the missing link of the M3 motorway. This was designed to shave 7 minutes off the journey time between Southampton and London. The workmen were accompanied by dozens of security guards, wearing fluorescent yellow jackets. Hence, the day would become known as Yellow Wednesday. This, very helpfully, is a black and white photo. So I invite you to imagine the yellow. There will be yellow a little bit later. They were met with resistance by the Dongas tribe, who were a small group of young people camped on the hill, who took their name from the ancient trackways, the hollowways, which ran through the hill on which they were camped. There's a picture of their camp, and these are the Dongas, the hollowways, the ancient hollowways that ran through the hill. I was at work, as usual, in Winchester Library, in the children's section on Yellow Wednesday. After work, I walked up to the down, as usual, to take supplies to the camp. Yellow. Promised you some yellow. Where the wild things are. Winchester, Wednesday, 9th of December, 1992. I am working in the library reshelving books. On a hill a mile away, all hell is breaking loose. I skulk in the aisles of the children's section, sticking missing picture labels onto spines. White butterflies fluttering over grassland. Serious owls in the blue of night. Rabbits with bobtails angled cheekily at borrowers. I decide to display the very hungry caterpillar, then, on a whim, the tiger who came to tea. I have a go on the laminator, The acrid taste of melting plastic film hangs in the corrals. I'll tackle minor book repairs tomorrow. Winchester, Thursday, 10th of December, 1992. I've hardly slept and smell of wood smoke. All our books are broken, and I have no heart for mending. How can I replace these torn end sheets? Fly leaves have been ripped from paste downs. Folded signatures have come unsewn. Joints are bent forever out of kilter. Beaded headbands flap, detached. I am not equipped to glue spines back. I seek out Maurice Sendak's book, Those Yellow Eyes and Terrible Teeth, before I can start to write what I have seen. So, there's not a lot of laughs in this book, but there are some photos at the back. Yellow Wednesday spawned 6 months of direct action and mass protests to try to stop the road. This next poem responds to this picture, which was published in the local paper, the Hampshire Chronicle. It responds to this picture using a method called ekphrasis, which is making art or writing about art. Sometimes it can go the other way as well. The photo shows a line of protesters symbolically trying to rebuild the down. It takes its title and its form, my poem, from Seamus Heaney's poem, Human Chain. Human Chain, after Seamus Heaney, Sunday, 7th of March, 1993. Looking at the blocks of chalk passed hand to hand by the protesters, silhouettes of black against the white and desecrated land, like Lowry's workers near a factory, or a thinning stand of trees, each caught in the act of putting something back. How insignificant the cars and lorries in the background are. How clear and strong the image of people aligning is, still moving to rebuild the down. We are only ever passing through. We are supposed to pass this on. One night, the Department of Transport's plan to build a temporary Bailey Bridge, giving large earth movers access to the construction site, which they codenamed Operation Market Garden, you actually couldn't make this stuff up, was disrupted by our Operation Greenfly. They weren't the only ones with a sense of humour. Toll. Saturday, 22nd of May, 1993. We pulled away the razor wire, pushed the fencing flat, and we were in, then up, then on, all 200 of us, swarming above the valley on the girders of their Bailey Bridge. All night we banged out rhythms with whatever tools we had to hand. We made the metal sing, brought forth a chime, a knell, a toll, a resounding reverberation appeal. With measured strokes, we struck the bracing frames as if they'd been cast from bell metal. From beneath our huddled silhouettes, all across the landscape, you could hear the bridge, finding the colour of its voice, rejoicing. The toll rings out across the valley, still. So, the Department of Transport, the British Department of Transport, employed a private detective agency to compile individual action files of our protest activity, and they used these to take out High Court injunctions against 77 of us, preventing us from entering the construction site. During a mass protest on the 4th of July 1993, several of us pinned our action file numbers to our chests and crossed the fence to once again walk on our hill. I was action file 36. I'm in the red T-shirt. I had very long hair then, and I look about 12. I wasn't. I was in my 20s, I think. 7 of us were subsequently imprisoned for breaking the injunction. The men were sent to Pentonville and the women to Holloway. The central sequence of my book, The Ballad of Yellow Wednesday, deals with our time in prison, and I'm just going to read the last part of that sequence to finish. Thank you so much to Michael for the invite to read. And to Stephen Connolly, who's not here, but he's based at the Seamus Heaney Centre, for putting us in touch and making it happen. And thank you so much to all of you for listening, and I can't wait to hear the next panellists. The sequence is dedicated to my fellow campaigner and inmate, the indefatigable Becca Lush. She's wearing the flimsy dress. She was Action File 14. Sentencing us, the High Court judge, Mr. Justice Elliott, said, "You have been quick to snatch the martyr's crown, and you may find it uncomfortable headgear." From Holloway Letters, The Martyr's Crown for Becca Lush. Holloway, lane or path that has been grooved down into the landscape due to the erosive powers of variously feet, wheels, and rainwater. Everybody was on the go. The moment that they let her out, Becca would turn cartwheels up and down the wing. She'd bend at the waist, reach down with her hands, drive the back leg over her head, land with the kick leg, push with her hands, bring the other foot down and stand. Hand, hand, foot, foot. Momentum was important, and while the sun on her regal purple T-shirt rose and set and rose again as she sprang sure-footed on the shiny floor, the fingers of each hand turned into wingtip, though she stayed rooted like the cork oak in a circle of herself. Like the cork oak in a circle of herself, each full-grown woman would turn a little girlish at the prospect of a proper hairdo. Sitting in lines of 3 or 4 or pairs, we'd plait each other's hair in tight, flat rows, part a section to get things started, make stitch braids out of the strands, adding in hair from the row below. We dreamed in parallel of fields double dug, rough hoed by the tiller, then ploughed into kick waves of keels and furrows. We'd reach the nape and keep on plaiting, secure each end with a snap bead, bollow tip, or barrette, our loose braids mirrored as a shoal of minnows. Our loose braids mirrored as a shoal of minnows, we'd go to education in the library and browse through De Profundis or the Ballad of Reading Jail. You could chat to Annette Tibbles, in for years for conspiracy to free caged rabbits, so she got a job shelving novels and looked after the cats. Dear Annette, thank you for the Marmite and that amazing information about police surveillance tactics. I hope you are out now, that you live on a farm somewhere quiet, with as many animals as you care to love, rear, feed, and as many books as you care to read. And as many books as you care to read would not be enough to haggle for a lighter, which, after tobacco, topped the hierarchy of tradable prison commodities. You'd hear tales of a 2-day barter, the swapping of a sweatshirt for a quarter of a matchstick split along its length. I was more than happy to peddle hair gel for chocolate, to eke out the portions dished up in the small dining hall on a tray filled with hollows. Supper at 4, then you'd starve till morning. We swapped a bit of this for a bit of that, though some would give anything to exchange futures. Though some would give anything to exchange futures, we were content in our new shared cell. We shunted our metal beds into an L and pinned up a cutting of the cutting from The Guardian to make it more homely. We learnt that letters out must be unsealed, that letters in could be collected at 11:30. that we got a lot more letters than anyone else. Letters matter. Once, before our appeal, I was woken by a face through the grill. "You're on production." It disturbed the whole dorm. In the middle of the night, I got up and packed, and everyone started writing letters home. I've done my time learning how to write back.
My name is Jools Gilson, and apparently I'm not supposed to be here, but hey. Right. I'm just teasing, Michael. Okay, so I am an artist. I'm also an educator. I'm based at UCC down in Cork, and I'm going to talk briefly about a project that's been in development since 2021 called Tempestries. It's also a bog project. I was really interested to hear other people from the bog project. Oh, you're there, yes. So I was just delighted to hear about your project. I did know about it, but it was great to hear more about it. So I did the initial kind of work on this as part of a Fulbright project in Boulder, Colorado in 2021. And then we also did a bulk of the work last year, funded by an Arts Council dance bursary. My colleague Benjamin Burns is here, who's a very beautiful sound artist. We're also collaborating with a textile artist and 2 dance artists and the Tyndall Institute. And I'll tell you a bit more about that later. With the Irish peatland bog as theme and metaphor, Tempestries evokes the story of a young woman lost in the bog in the 7th century and discovered during mechanical peat digging. She is found with her clothes preserved. I use this science to embody glimpses into her life and what her story tells us about femininity, ecology, power, and the warming of the world. Tempestries makes connections between the female labour of textile making, the moving female body, and our relationship to landscape. So I should say that my art practice works across disciplines. I'm a dance artist and choreographer, but I also make work for galleries, and I'm also a writer. And more than anything, I'm a bit irreverent of disciplinary boundaries, and I'm interested in what disciplines and what structures of dissemination are most useful. So I'm interested in things being able to slip. I'm showing this slide partly as informational, but given the audience here today, you probably know something of this, but also because I used this as projection in both sharing of works in progress as large projections, and they show a fragment of the textile that was found with this bog skeleton. So we've called her Sarah, because we were tired of calling her the bog skeleton. This was a name that would have been used in 7th century Ireland, and the reason that this is a black silhouette is because of my ongoing tangles with the National Museum of Ireland about being able to have any access to this bog skeleton and her textiles. So I had asked if I could have any images, any photographs that they might have had, and they said no. And so I have this bad photocopy of one article written by the textile artist Elizabeth, I've forgotten her last name, it'll come to me, called Libby, and because it's a bad photocopy, this is what I've got. So I just took that on board, as we need to do in times of climate crisis, just taking what we have and working with that. But I kind of find them extraordinary. They're a bit like my mind's gone, but the image of them I find very compelling. During mechanical peat cutting in a private bog just off the N4 between Termonbarry and Strokestown in County Roscommon, a female bog skeleton is discovered, but not before she is violently shredded, uprooted from the peat, her bones and clothes spread out by the machine. It is the 26th of May, 2005. The keeper of Irish antiquities initially dates her to the 17th century because of her clothes, but she is wrong by 1,000 years. This is an image from work that I did during my Fulbright residency in the US in 2021. These are 2 dance artists called Ondine and Christy, who I worked closely with. And what I was really just beginning to explore, and I should explain for those of you who are not familiar with what dance artists do and what choreographers do, is that I'm really interested in using embodied practices and often vocal practices as a way to explore and find a more in-depth elaboration of what I'm exploring. So here I'm particularly just interested in the whole experience of what happened to this woman in the bog, and the process of being held in the bog for 1,000 years and more, with this very slow accretion of 1 millimetre a year, and that sense of kind of pressure and this anaerobic and acidic environment and the weight of it and the wetness of it. So I also worked with fricatives and voice, coming from Roy Hart voice practices. And these are practices which use all kinds of vocalizations far beyond the kind of everyday that we use. So really using that as a way, again, to kind of further explore. So using fricatives, these are sounds like things that are pressured through the mouth, allow us to kind of get that sense or explore in a different embodied way that sense of being held by the bog. So we used that in that performance. I was also in this very gorgeous studio, very unlike much what we got here in Ireland. So in the sense that they had these really huge projection screens, and I was playing between, and I didn't bring it today, but I'll bring it tomorrow because we're going to share some of this work in performance tomorrow. Textile. I worked with a textile artist here who developed a textile that was kind of like the moss, which makes the bog, and that connection between some of the clothes that the woman would have found and had on her. And one of them is this shaggy mantle. So it's a textile which has these big tassels coming out of it, and it's likely the earliest example of an Irish shaggy mantle, which has a long history, but the examples we have are much more recent. So it's just interesting because this woman was held in the bog inside what was a cloak or a blanket, this really heavy, probably waterproofed item, and the moss that then creates the bog itself. And we are so this particular image was working between images of this textile and the dance artist who's coming up next here. This is Anna working with the textile and also working with images of moss itself. So just beginning to play with that difference between textile and the construction of the bog. And all of this, the reason that I'm interested in doing all of this is trying to find enchanting and poetic or embodied ways to imagine connection between this woman and the bog as a way to think about contemporary connection with bogs and the kind of work that you are doing in your project, and how can we use these practices as a way to engage people differently. This is also the mosses' story. In their slow and patient way, the mosses wait their time and come to make the bog itself. Slow, dark as hunger, thick with memory. So as part of this, because this bog skeleton, the quality of her different textiles are of such a high quality, they are incredibly well woven, and there are 7 different kinds of textile. And because the labour of textile making at the time was so extraordinary and took so much time, that we know that she's likely highborn, but who she was and how she was, we don't know, but I can imagine. So she wasn't buried in the bog, we know that. And so she came to some kind of misadventure, whether she fell or was followed and so forth. But a lot of the imaginative thinking that we've been working on has been about how she came to fall in the bog or to end up there. And this is one of the texts that we used, and that last year we also worked with different dance artists here in Ireland. And this is the text that Anna in the image here is working in relation to. A bog is not a place for running, but she's running nonetheless. It's a place of damp-hung chill and mist, clinging to throat and chest. It's a place of uncertain steadiness, there, where the wateriness of the world mingles with its provisional solidity. She can't see if she's being followed. Humps and ridges separate dark pools, and she's careful to keep to the higher ground, but her feet are drenched anyway. The mist shifts and confuses her, her breath coming faster now, leaving her in ragged clouds. She turns to check behind her again, but there is nothing but the grey, curving mist. And then she falls. The textile archaeologist, Elizabeth Wincott Heckett, is called to the National Museum of Ireland to examine the shredded clothing. She must piece together hundreds of small fragments of fabric, but eventually she is, quote, able to identify 7 different textile types, including a possible pile-woven cloth that may have been a shaggy mantle. 5 textiles of excellent quality indicated that the young woman was a high-status individual. Though daunted at the havoc in front of her, she is also enchanted. In her careful hands, she touches something that last felt human touch 1,300 years ago. She is an alchemist of textiles like this, partial, drenched in the bog for 1,000 years and more, a ragged constellation of fibres. Under her steady and careful eye, they begin to give up their woven histories. Another strand of the work, and I know this is work that's, again, much after what Alison Tickle was, what's her last name, is it Tickle? Tickle, sorry, I shouldn't say Tickle. We're saying this morning about what an abundance of this kind of work is happening and what a joy that is and how we really need to be connecting with each other. So I know there's been a great resurgence of interest in natural dyes, for example. So it's something, for me, for this work, and because I've had a long-standing 20 years interest in textiles, I'm really interested in the plants on the bog that were likely used for dyeing the textiles, and not just in that kind of the fact of that, but also because it's about connection to landscape and how there are lots of projects which are using the use of natural dyes as a way to connect younger and older people with the natural world and with clothes, because clothes are not just clothes for me or textiles, but they're things that we all, that touch us literally and that we carry around, and that connection is can be a real trope for how we can connect to landscape differently if we colour our clothes with things from the wild. So I have some choreography that we've worked on in relation to this, and I'll be sharing that with you tomorrow. So we had a very wonderful field trip to County Roscommon in May last year. It was myself and Ben, who's here today, and Veronica, the textile artist. And again, through a great adventure of trying to find information, because the National Museum of Ireland have not been very helpful, that we found a wonderful Gardaí called Garda Ray Greenan, who was there when the bog skeleton was found, and was so kind and so wonderful, and looked through all his records from 2005 to see if there were any images, and it was just before they had digital images, so there were none. But he came out to us, and we'd actually been the wrong side of the N4 looking for this, where the skeleton had found, because there's a little cross on a map somewhere, and it was in the wrong place. So he took us and he loaned us his really, really fancy stepladder to get over this big high fence, took us onto the bog and took us to exactly where the bog skeleton was found. And the bog, there was quite a lot of regrowth, but in this particular area where the cutting was happening, again, I don't know what happened after that, because when I did go up to the National Museum of Ireland, so they wouldn't let me see the skeleton, but they said, you can come and look at the record. And I was, I breathed very deeply and said, okay. I got the train up from Cork to Dublin and went and got my little tag and went into the room so I could read these records, thinking there would be some dusty things in a file. And they literally printed something off that I could read. So, and there's a camera here, so I wasn't allowed to copy anything. So I hand wrote the report again. And there were some photographs of those textile fragments that were better than those ones. So I did very sneakily kind of take some pictures. But anyway, in this report, it had said that there was another report, and that there was another report that they had gone back and they had done more details because there was a tocha, a road very close to where she was found on the same level. So she was likely on that. And so I wrote to them when I got back and I said, did you go back, and is there a report and can I see it? So they said, yes, there is a report, but no, you can't see it. So it was really wonderful to actually be there and have this Gardaí be so helpful to us. And we could see that this whole area where she had been found had been fenced off. So what that meant is that there was 20 years of growth there. And this bilberry photographed by Ben is one of the things that would have been used for natural dyeing, likely, but there was 20 years of growth, and it was kind of extraordinary to be in this kind of wild area and to see the cut area of the bog where she was found. Okay, I'm going to play a little short video now. How do I play this? Oh, it's gonna...
That's what you want. That's when it spins really well, when you
I wonder if 7th century children were doing that.
yeah.
It looks fun.
So just to say, all the sound there, I was really interested to hear others talking about recording sounds from the bog. So it's all field trip recordings done by Ben, my colleague here, and his composition. He'll talk a bit more about that tomorrow, about the music that he's done. I'm going to finish now. These are just some images from this one and from the work that was funded by the Dance Bursary last summer. This is Justine Cooper, and then Justine Cooper and Siobhan na Gwenyn. And these are masks made from willow and from moss. It's crocheted moss. And some of the work there. Just finally. In this work, then, I am finding poetic and embodied strategies for imagining and reimagining the connection between bodies, often female, and landscape. In doing so, I am foregrounding the urgency of cultivating an embodied, affective relationship to vulnerable landscapes as a way to protect them and ourselves, and as a way to meet the climate urgency with strategies of enchantment as well as practical weight.
I've been on panels before, but I've never been on a panel with a poet and a dancer before. So Michael, thank you. This is just a magnificent way to share different types of art. So because I'm a visual artist, I think it's really important to first talk about what my influences have been so that you understand my perspective. I love that you called this panel Artist Perspectives. I have two main visual influences that are very different from one another. One is that I was born into a Mennonite family. My mother grew up Amish and my father grew up conservative Mennonite. I don't know if you all are aware of these cultures, so it's a very conservative Christian sect. The Amish tend to live away from people. They wear very plain clothing and have coverings. And they don't have art the way we might think of it. Like, there's no way they would hang a picture on their wall. But they have beautiful quilts and incredible woodworking. So there's functional beauty in the Amish and Mennonite culture. And that functional beauty is often very craft heavy. It's beautiful quality. And I'm aware that even though I have very much fallen away from these lifestyles, I still have ingrained in me that aesthetic. And I think you'll see some of that in my work. But I also have another influence that is equally strong and very different, and that is that I was born in Costa Rica, and Costa Rican art is bright and happy and magnificent. It's just, it's like the flowers there. There's just amazing, the art that's made in Costa Rica. And it's so different from the Amish Mennonite aesthetic, but it is also very craft heavy, very much flat patterns, and so you'll see both of those things. I think that's important to say. The other thing I want to talk about before I show you my work is why I do it. I do a lot of art and design for children. That is my main focus, or that's my main audience. And I do it because I believe it matters, and I want to give an example of why I believe it matters. I'm currently 55 years old. When I was 6, if someone had asked me, "What's recycling?" I don't know if I would have known what that word was. I'm not sure that I would have known at 6. It just was not in my world. Now, if you ask a 6-year-old what recycling is, they can very articulately tell you what recycling is. And if you happen to put something in the wrong trash can in the presence of a 6-year-old, they are happy to dig it out for you and put it in the proper trash can. The reason for that is, as a society, we have been willing to teach our children. Mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles and babysitters and grandparents and teachers and librarians, so many people have contributed to teaching children about recycling. And it has made a difference. And I believe that artists are one of those groups that have made the difference. So that's why I'm engaged in this. So I thought maybe the best way to tell you about my work is just to give you 5 examples of what I do. I'm a cut paper artist, so everything you see are tiny little pieces of paper. I work old school. I just use a scissors and glue. I try really hard not to sneeze while I'm working, or paper flies everywhere. These pieces, let's see, they were a little bigger. Each one was a little bigger than the size of these screens. I was very fortunate to be invited to an artist residency for a month in Costa Rica, and I did a series of 10 of these large images on bodies of water. So here you'll find an ocean, tide pools, wetlands, and glaciers. And underneath each body of water, it said a reason why it was important to keep it clean, but I geared it toward reasons for 4-year-olds to understand. So for example, one that's not up here is puddles. And so underneath it, it said, you know, it's important to keep puddles clean because if we put litter in puddles and your pet drinks from the puddle, your pet might get sick. So that's a way for a 4-year-old to understand, like, oh, that relates to a 4-year-old's life. And then at the end of the show, I had a list of things that, again, 4-year-olds could do to help keep water clean. I think it's so important to empower the younger generation as we move forward in sustainability. And I was thrilled this morning when Tom showed the tote bag project. You know, he's talking about all these obscure adult things in his projects, and then he was willing to show that they had this outreach for young kids, and that matters. It matters so much. I really love national parks very much. I'm kind of a national park junkie. We have a national park near where I live in New England called Acadia National Park. It's on the coast of New England, and I was invited there for a 3-week residency where they wanted me to focus on the biodiversity that was in different parts of the park. So the first panel is just facts about the park in general. The second panel is about wetlands, tide pools, and forests. And one thing I do a lot is I try to pick out facts that kids will get excited about. So for example, we have beavers in the United States. I don't know if you know this, but beavers have transparent eyelids, or one set of transparent eyelids, so they can swim underwater with their eyes closed, but they can still see where they're going. Okay, you tell that to a kid, and they will remember that, and they will get so excited about that, and they will tell people about that. So all of the facts that I pick, I try to have them be things that kids will get excited about. Last summer, I was invited to an artist residency in Wollemi National Park in Australia for a month. That was just magnificent. I had not been to Australia, and Australia has really different kinds of nature and creatures because it's been on an island away from other land masses, so the animals and flora and fauna have evolved slightly differently. So I wanted to make a game that kids could play, and in the course of playing the game, they would learn about good environmental practices. So do you have the game Candyland? Do you know what it's a simple game that kids play where each step is a color, they pick cards, whatever color they pick, they advance. It's a very simple game that you can play without knowing how to read. I kind of use the gameplay of Candyland. However, when they land on a color, they pick a corresponding card that's either a good choice or a bad choice about nature. So let's say you land on a good choice card. Maybe it says, you took a hike in the forest and enjoyed the wildflowers by smelling them rather than picking them. Great choice. Advance 5 steps. But if you picked a bad choice card, it might say something like, you were walking in the forest and you saw a spider and were frightened, so you smushed it. Bad choice. Go back 3 steps. As you're playing, you also have the opportunity to collect biodiversity cards. The game ends when the first person gets to the end, but that's not the winner. The winner is who has the most biodiversity in their hands at the end of the game. And so I think the more that we can have education be fun, like have learning be in the process, like kids don't realize that they're necessarily learning when they're playing this game. They're just playing the game. This isn't specifically about sustainability, but I think it's really important in all my work to think about visual learners. I know that I was someone who didn't think I was good at science until I went on a marine biology class, because I had always had textbooks that were just text, and that's not how my brain works. And then on marine biology, I was under the ocean, and it was like being in an art museum, and I did really well in that class and realized, oh, I love science. I just didn't love the way science was taught. So here's a series of books that I did with a physics professor on the physics of the 5 senses. And I really try as much as possible to visually show the concepts that are being talked about so that visual learners can understand it better. The last piece that I'll show is, actually the whole piece is in the Hutton Gallery right now. I hope that you're able to see it while you're here, for sure. You can go through today if you want. I am speaking much more in depth about my work tomorrow at 10 a.m. So if you can come to the Hutton Gallery tomorrow at 10 a.m., I'd love to see you there. But I do want to talk just a little bit about this project. So this is a project that contains 2 different types of squares, blue squares and black squares, and then what I think of as ocean images. So the blue squares have fabulous facts about animals in the ocean. So, you know, the heart of a blue whale is the size of a car, and the tongue of a blue whale weighs as much as an elephant. And octopuses have 9 brains, a main brain and then a brain for each of their limbs. And lobsters have teeth in their stomachs, and so many facts that kids love. But then it also has these panels which talk about plastic in the ocean and how significant our plastic statistics are. I was really curious how kids would respond to this. So actually, before I say that, the name of the show is Full of Wonder or Full of Plastic, you decide, because it is our choice. You know, this is our making, this is our doing, we get to make this choice. So this morning, I had 75 second and third graders over in the gallery looking at this. And it was just wonderful. I was so pleased with how they received it. They were very, very excited about the facts. They had lots of questions, and they said they wanted to go home and tell people about the facts. And I think it's a great way to engage people. And then we had a conversation, you know, about plastic in the ocean. Another thing that I always do with classrooms, and this ties back to why I initially said that I was born in Costa Rica. I think to solve global problems, you need global involvement. And I want students to really learn to love their heritage and learn to feel that their heritage matters in these big conversations. Unfortunately, my country has done a lot of terrible talk out of recent governments about immigration and people that seem different. And as much as possible, I want to be providing a different dialogue for young kids to hear. So before I even talked about my show, we had a large Post-it paper, and I said, all right, where do you think I'm from? And everyone's, America, you're from America. And I said, well, actually, my parents were born in the United States, so I wrote the United States. I said, but I was born in Costa Rica. And they were all surprised. And I said, all right, so in this room, I want you to think about where you were born, where your parents were born, and where your grandparents were born. And let's see how many countries we can have. And, you know, many hands went up. They were very excited. And it ended up that from those 75 students, there were 37 different countries represented, which just warmed my heart. And then I could talk about how we need everyone to participate in this. So I really want to thank Queens for enabling me to have this show here. It's really been one of the honors of my career. And special thanks to Ben, who runs the gallery, who is just incredible to work with. So thank you.
Yeah, this is amazing. I feel quite honored to be here. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Amanda, for making that happen. And there are a lot of tough acts to follow here, but I'm going to try. Okay, so I'm senior lecturer at Burren College of Art. I teach in the art and ecology. You probably hear from my accent, I'm also American, so we're representing here today. So I'll start off with, I think when I start to think deeply about something or I'm very involved in it, I almost inadvertently start to write manifestos. So I have just a brief manifesto I'll write, and then I'll introduce you to my practice. I think a lot about how art intercedes on behalf of the natural world, the more than human world, and the ways in which art functions in this context. And in order to understand more fully, I dissect art's processes, its methods and methodologies. I itemize and draw parallel associations. I mind map, and I'm curious. How do environmental aesthetics coalesce to create meaning and metaphor? How does artistic practice draw our attention to the web of interrelationality? How do we come to better sense the complexity of the physical, biological, cultural, political, and historical aspects of ecological systems? How does art visualize or sonify complex data sets in order for us to comprehend the magnitude of the climate crisis? And how does it re-envision ecological relationships and propose new possibilities for coexistence? Urgent in its inquiry, the process is highly analytic, strategic in its search for clarity and for comprehension, but then, of course, it is rigid. In this quest for a typology and categorization, I feel boxed in. And if I spend too much time in this place of logic and reason, I feel my brows start to knit, my shoulders drop to my ears, my back rounds, my stomach clenches, my hands curl into fists. And it seems I've prepared myself for a fight, or maybe to absorb another blow. And it is a dense armor. It is a way not to be blown apart, not to be vulnerable, not to have to hold all this weight and inherited guilt. It is a way not to acknowledge this inconsolable sadness, this solastalgia. And it is valuable and protective strategy to an extent. But what I often forget is that there are ways of knowing have been adapted from extractivist, colonizing, patriarchal practices that have given us the Anthropocene in the first place. And they have a calcifying and fossilizing effect. So I'm grateful to the materiality of soil that brings me back to earth, as it were. It grounds me in no uncertain terms. And through the Soil Project, this year-long residency and project commissioned by the Butler Gallery, I spent 2021 becoming with soil and in conversation with the wider soil-centered community. So over the next few slides, I'm going to talk about the project. Yes, I'm going to give you a broader approach just to give you an insight into my practice. My practice is very much rooted in materiality, and that's where a lot of the inquiry comes from. I'm interested, in how natural systems and processes, biological processes, can be reflected in artistic practice, and how I can work with those systems. That tends to then translate into participatory works or community-based projects. So I'm very much interested in appropriating scientific methodologies, as you'll see, and I'm very much then interested in giving them back and then sharing with other people and other communities what that looks like. So this is Butler Gallery, and this is the River Nore, which we were actually talking about earlier. For those of you who don't know, in 2015, the UN Food and Agricultural Organization declared 2015 the year of international soils, expressing concerns that soil, which you may or may not know, is a finite resource. means it's non-renewable on a human timescale. And for me, I think that fact was really shocking. I mean, I can go down to Lidl or Aldi and pick up a bag of soil, so how is that a finite resource? But it is, in terms of erosion or degradation, it is lost. So I started thinking about soil, and I went immediately to fungi. I'm very much interested in mycelium. I think that's probably a hot topic at the moment because it's so fascinating, it's so everywhere, and it's hidden. It's these organisms that have been overlooked and that are so essential for a long time. I started making spore prints to see if I could kind of coax shapes or images out of the mushrooms, out of the spore prints. And I started to see, because my practice is very much materially based, I'm interested in sculpture, and I started trying to grow sculpture with fungi. And there were a series of sculptures that came out of that, working with oyster mushrooms. And when, as you might have noticed from this, 2021, we were kind of in and out of lockdown. At the moment when I started this residency, it was a participatory residency, and we were in a really severe lockdown. We were in 3K lockdown. And I was thinking, I live in rural Kildare, actually. How on earth are we supposed to get together? Everybody's masks, we can't leave. So I started coming into looking at soil, how soil was made, and again, coming back to this idea of appropriating scientific methodologies. And one of them is called an Evans box. So this is like a 2D terraria that scientists use to track worm behavior and to study it. So I started making stop motion videos as a way to think about the amount of time it takes to make soil. And I'm drawing a page out of Max Libron's book, who is a researcher and author. And they talk about how, as researchers, we have this obligation to point to all of the other ways in which our practice has been informed. So you'll see there's lots of people peppered throughout this conversation and kind of honoring the information and kind of conversation that I've been with them. So part of this residency, we were allowed outside towards September, and I asked Mary Bolfin to come and do a foraging walk with us in Kilkenny Castle. We found lots of different fungi species, and she kind of just opened our eyes to what was around us in terms of the kind of the vastness of the living organisms. At the beginning then of this soil project residency, trying to think through how can I bring people into conversation when we're isolated in our homes, I came across the General Soil Map of Ireland. This one, done in 1980, very interestingly, maps the entire island, where kind of ones previously and after only kind of map either the Republic or Northern Ireland. And for me, I started to, it radically shifted the way I was thinking about soil and the representation of soil. Those like corals and the blues put together are so vibrant. And I kind of thought this soil scientist is definitely an artist. So I started thinking, I wonder if I could do the reverse. If the scientist could appropriate this artistic language, could I use the materiality of soil to make a map? So I started a call out, and I asked people to gather soil sample for me. And part of that was to embark on the citizen science project. We were going to gather soil in this very strategic way. But it was also a sensory exercise. So I was asking people to describe what it looked like in a 3-barreled word, to taste the soil, to listen to the soil, to feel the soil in its hands, and to really engage with soil. And then to send me back a small sample with the idea that we could collectively build a soil map of Ireland. And I started to look at the other ways in which the natural beauty of Ireland was represented, and going to An Post and going through their archives. They must have thought, I sent the packages out to about 100 people. And so there was 2 envelopes involved in every submission, and I was ordering all of these stamps from An Post on a regular basis, and I'm sure they were like, who is this person? They started throwing in kind of free stamps because it was so like, who? Anyway, So I was trying to create these little landscape representations on the outer, on the envelopes. And I started getting back all of these amazing stories about how people were collecting it, about what they had found, about where they had gone. So that's up in Carrauntoohil. Again, I'm trying to point to the people that were part of this project. This is a very small fraction. Soil scientists were writing back to me to kind of show the work that they were doing. And all of these stories were incredible. And so I started to map them. See if that will play. And what I kind of felt like I was mapping was this fungi flush. And I was thinking about mycelium and connectivity. And I took the general soil map of Ireland and I started to map it through strings and locate. I had this original idea that I was going to build a community, but what I found was that I was actually just tapping into a community that already existed, which was so enriching. And that was what was, this person knew this person, and this person knew this person, and it was all connected. It was really, yeah, it was amazing to see that, and to kind of feel that even though we weren't together, that there was still this community that was thinking about soil. But in the meantime, I was getting packets of maybe about 5 grams of soil back, various grays and browns, as you can imagine, and I was thinking, oh no, what am I going to do with this soil? How am I going to make this material map? And I came across this, you know, when in doubt, go to science. I came across this process called chromatography, and it was developed by a German soil scientist in 1953, Einfried Pfeiffer. And he was interested in biodynamic farming, and he wanted to develop a methodology for farmers to test their soil in a way that was economical. Rather than gathering this and sending it off to a lab, this was reproducible and farmers could use this. So I started to make maps of each soil sample that was coming back to me. So the process, you take soil and you grind it up in a mortar and pestle and you sieve it out, dissolve it in a very watered down version of sodium hydroxide solution. And then there's, if you can kind of see this little hole in the middle, I make the filter paper light sensitive with silver nitrate, and there's a small little paper wick. The paper wick gets inserted into the middle of the paper, and it draws up this soil solution that's dissolved in sodium hydroxide, and it starts to radiate out. And then you expose the image in the sun, usually in a window, for about 7 days. So it's this alternative photography process that's created through soil and sunlight. And I made a map of Ireland, approximate. But I think what really came out for me was this idea that it was so much more than kind of the material soil map that I was hoping for. Oh, sorry, here we go again. Just lost my, oh, there we are. I was able to host a workshop for that, to kind of share that with other people. You can see we're all still masked up there. And the curator for this project who commissioned me, Holly Kearns, reached out to Merlin Sheldrake. She said, do you think we could be in conversation? I was like, oh, please. And yeah, he very generously shared his time with us, and we had a conversation just about mycelium and fungi. And I put that up because it's definitely one of the highlights of my career so far. And at the end, Holly very generously said, is there anything else you wish this project could have become? You know, you had foraging walks, and we talked to Merlin Sheldrake, and I said, because we couldn't come together, I wish I could send those images, the soil samples, back to people. And she very generously found additional funding, and I was able to make an archival print of everybody's soil sample and send it back to them. Yeah, and I think there was this lovely then kind of knock-on effect from this. People kind of, it was about a year later, it took a while for me to kind of scan and print everything out. But there's this knock-on effect where I've traveled around quite a bit with the projects and over into Wales. I've worked with a youth art and ecology collective in Kilkenny, looking again at soils, working with regenerative farmer Susanna Crampton. And it's had this life that I think I never would have expected. And it's yeah, for me, it's a way to kind of share my practice and to be in conversation with soil. I think I'm probably right at time, am I? Sorry, with my faffing. I might show just one, okay, I might just show one slide, because I think for me, it kind of connects it. There is this scientist, Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, and she talks about, okay, well, in the face of climate change, what do we do? And she has this Venn diagram that she's created. And she talks about starting with, okay, what's the work that needs doing? What are you good at? And what brings you joy? And in that intersection, in this lovely little bubble, is the work that you can do. Thanks very much.
That was fantastic. I mean, what amazing work we've seen this afternoon. I was really struck by the beauty of everything that I've seen, and I think that's quite incredible. I suppose we haven't got a lot of time, but I suppose one question for all of you, I guess, is that a lot of this, the words, maybe not so much in Emma's case, but maybe so, a lot of things around science and that relationship. Is that an easy one? Is it one you've always had? I kind of like to know a bit more about that art, I guess, science relationship, or in Emma's case, I suppose there's a kind of an external thing you've been involved in. You know, it's that kind of those reference points that inform your work. So I suppose for all of you, it's not just about necessarily the art itself. There's some other motivating factor. Anyone?
Maybe don't start with me.
Okay. Is this on? Can you hear?
Yeah.
So I mentioned when I was talking that I always thought I was bad at science. I thought I didn't like science until it was taught in a way that involved the arts. And I think it's so important for particularly children to be taught science with art, because children love science. They naturally love science. But if they're taught it in a way that makes them feel stupid, they're going to think they're not good at it. They're going to think they don't like it. So for me, I just think it's so important.
Yeah, for me, I always loved science. I did. I grew up in England and did A levels, and we had to specialise. And so I did zoology and chemistry A levels and English, because I didn't know if I wanted to be a doctor or kind of do English, and I didn't know. But that system forced me to choose at a very young age, and it's only in more recent years that I have realised the pleasure of I've been able to kind of get back to that kind of relishing of science. Yeah. So yeah, I'm really repeating what you've just said, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it probably started when I was quite young. I had this amazing scout leader. She was a chemistry teacher, and she used to do these incredible experiments with us. She would bring us into her lab. And there we were, 10 girls, about 7 years old. And she did this one experiment one time. She had the Bunsen burner, in the chemistry lab, and she had glycerin and soap spread out onto this black table, and she rubbed her hands in it, and she turned the gas burner on, and then she had her assistant light the Bunsen burner, and she blew a bubble with the gas over the Bunsen burner, and then she held her two hands over the flame, and she held fire like this in her hands. And I was like, yes, yes. And she did all these amazing experiments with us, and she made us feel really empowered. We, learned how to build fires and use knives when 8-year-old girls weren't supposed to really use knives in that way, and we camped. And yeah, I think she just kind of showed me agency and the wonder of the natural world. It was really incredible.
Sounds like a health and safety nightmare, but great.
You couldn't do it now.
Wonderful. And listening to what you were saying, Jools, as well. So I started off as a scientist. I did science A levels as well, and I did geology and geophysics at university. Yep. And I realised at the end of my first year that this was not for me, because I just didn't want to work for the oil industry, basically, which is what I was going to have to do at that stage. Also, that was in the 80s, and the British Antarctic Survey didn't employ women. And I remember at the age of 18 tackling a man in a lecture about it. But yeah, so for me, science was very important. And actually this book, if it's about anything, is about chalk. It's a book about chalk and also fricatives, which interest me greatly as well. But yes, science was under there for me.
I was really struck. Everything I've seen, there was a real sense of really intensive craft in what people have done, time invested in things. Emma, in your case, obviously, wasn't planned that way, but you know, what struck me was just that everything was born on the back of incredible investment of time, and I know that from the work, Ingrid, that you have done. Jools, you must have had, I mean, thinking of the kind of breadth of things you had to, literally climbing over fences and things to go and experience the things that you're gathering in. I was just curious to know how you feel about that. Is that the same with all your practice, or is it unique to these kind of climate or ecologically informed pieces?
Well, I think one of the things that really interests me about the event today is about the different kinds of funding structures, because people have been talking about systems and so forth. And, you know, I'm in the very privileged position of teaching at a university and being a professor, which means that I'm not in that kind of precarity that most artists are. And but I also lead UCC Creative, which is this initiative. So I'm also commissioning artists. And so I'm very keenly aware of that. And I'm really interested in how, because we need time. And ironically, at a time where it feels like we're running out of time, we need to take more time, because it takes time to connect and to kind of listen. And so, but the funding structures and the systemic structures that we have often foster against that. So in terms of the kinds of funding structures that I have been able to access, or other artists, we've had a lot of contributions today from the Creative Ireland, the really progressive Creative Ireland funding structures. There's also Create in Ireland, in the Republic, which really focuses on kind of community engagement or engaged arts practice. Then you have the Arts Council, which is much more focused on the art. And then you have the whole science funding. So we've got some funding, for example, from Science Foundation Ireland, because we're collaborating with some engineers, and we'll share more on that tomorrow. But aside from my particular story, it feels like we need some combination of all of that, and we need more flexibility, and we need more accessibility for artists to be able to navigate that. It's hard enough for those of us who are senior academics to do it. And I think artists have the skills extraordinarily to be able to do that, but they need to be able to be facilitated by more progressive, and especially on the science side. Because from the science side, as has already been mentioned this morning, there's almost always budgets for what they call EPA, I'm learning a new language, education and public engagement. So we're going into, what's it called, Ben? Is it Discover? I can't remember what it's called. There's a big science festival that we'll be sharing some of this work at. And I'm interested in like how that education and public outreach work can also be work that's funded by the Arts Council and so forth. That was a long answer, sorry.
So time plays a very big part in my work for two reasons. One is my work almost becomes a meditation for me. I often lose time when I'm in the middle of painting. I can paint for hours and not get hungry, not get tired. I just kind of get into this, meditative state, I think. So in that sense, it's important. But I also think it's important because what kids often remark on, and even adults remark on, is they'll say things like, wait, you cut out every single piece of that paper? You cut out all the eyes? Or you really painted all of these circles? Like they're amazed at the amount of time that I put into the project, and that makes them want to give more of their time in engaging with the project. Whereas if I had just printed out 100 prints and put them on the wall, that just wouldn't have the same effect. So I like your question. Time's very important in my work.
Yeah, for me, because I like to think of my work. It's broader than this, but I think of collaborating with natural systems, and in particular, I've tried to make sculptures with birds and bees and fungi, and obviously then the exposure of the chromatograms in the sunlight. I have to kind of sink in. I have to, I suppose, step out of human time, human-centered time, and sink into a different time scale in order to allow the work to be what it is. And that it radically shifts the way I think, the way I move through kind of time and space. It's a real luxury, I think, to be able to do that, to kind of say, look, I don't have control over this, I don't have over time, over the outcomes, and time is very much a factor in how the work is made.
Yeah, I would echo so much of that. And I think for me, as a poet, it's basically constantly a balance between time and money, time and money, time and money. So I tend to write and then teach frenetically for a period, and then write, and then. But it's a constant juggle the whole time. But the work, yeah. So Twyford Down encapsulated, 100 million years of geological history and 4,000 years of human history. And I think that to write about it, I mean, it's taken me 30 years really. But it's this process, isn't it, of time and layering and reflection in order to be able to create anything artistic of any value, I think. So, I think all of us are experiencing our own engagement with this problem and this issue.
Well, speaking of time, unfortunately we have to move on. But can I thank you all very much for your contributions in this session? Thank you very much. Thank you.